God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, He spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I can see your hand in everything you've done. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. So will I.
God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty your voice. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice.
And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I. 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 If the stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains were made to worship, so will I. If the oceans roar your praises, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. The wind goes where you send it, so will I. Oh, if the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. every part designed and a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart 8 billion different ways. Every precious one, the child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. What measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leave the one behind. You're the one who never leave the one behind. You're the one who never leave the one behind.
Good evening, Faith Baptist Church. So glad to be back and in the building this evening with you. We're going to start off with a really fun and energetic song, This Is the Day. Let's stand together if you would, please. We're going to sing that together. This is the day.
This is the day that the Lord has made, that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it, and be glad in it. This is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. This is the day that the Lord has
One more time.
made, that the Lord has made, that the Lord has made.
I believe our brother Lance is going to come up and open us up in a word of prayer this evening. So glad to have you in the building, Lance. Please, open us up.
Gracious Father, we thank you. We thank you for another day that you have made and the opportunity to participate in it, Lord. May we give you glory today. May you bless the words from our speaker. May you open our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.
We're going to sing one more song this evening. I Sing the Mighty Power of God. Let's sing it together.
I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise and spreads the flowing seas abroad and built the lofty skies. I sing the wisdom that ordained the sun to rule the day. The moon shines full at his command, and all the stars obey. I sing the goodness of the Lord that filled the earth with food. He formed the creatures with his word, and then pronounced them good. Lord, how your wonders are displayed wherever I turn my eye. If I survey the ground I tread, or gaze upon the sky, there's not a plant or flower below, but makes your glories known. And clouds arise and tempests blow by order from your throne. Well, all that borrows life from you is ever in your care, and everywhere that man can be, our God is present there.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Last line of that song, when we were working in practice a little bit earlier this evening, we stopped for a moment. The Bible clearly supports this statement that everywhere that man can be, our God is present there. As we said last Sunday morning in church, God is right here, right now. I'm so thankful to belong to him this evening, and so thankful that the Lord gives us the privilege to be able to study his word together. And I said this to you this morning, but I just want to be very clear. As a pastor, there are many times when I feel like I'm deficient in an area where I really wish that God's people had some clearer teaching. And so it was my desire to bring somebody who could come and address some of the issues of, as you did this morning, Ben, worldview, and then also creation versus evolution this evening in this first session, and some others issues in the second session. Really thankful that you made it in tonight and grateful that you're here. I know that we're being recorded and that we're streaming online tonight, and so I hope that that will be a blessing to others as well, that they'll be able to get in on this teaching. We were blessed this morning to have you, Ben. Ben happens to know the Ader family, or knows the Ader family very well, but he's a good guy, okay? He's a really good guy and loves the Lord, served in a church in Georgia for some time where the Aders were, and I think your kids basically grew up there. You were there for 14 years in Georgia before the Lord moved your family to Pensacola. And so it blessed us. We had set this up before we discovered that you all knew him, and so it really blessed us that there was a connection there. Brother, come this evening, if you would, please, and teach God's people, if you would. Thank you for coming and being with us.
All right, well, thank you very much again for having me. It is my pleasure to be with you. I enjoyed spending time with the Johnsons, the Aders, the Sales. We had a great time at Dixie Crossroads. First time I'd ever had rock shrimp. I love shrimp. I'd never had rock shrimp before. So that was a pleasure. So I figured that this meme that we have up here is probably fitting, especially for what, like a big chunk of the United States seems to be dealing with right now. And this is part of the reason why we moved to Florida, right? So we don't have to deal with all of the snow. And that's what I thought. I mentioned that I'm from Iowa, and I don't like cold weather. I do not care for cold weather, and I felt like the wintertime in Iowa was extremely bleak and ugly and nasty, and so for me, growing up, I was just excited to come down to Pensacola. The first time I ever saw the ocean or the Gulf was when it came down to look at the college, and I just thought, oh man, this is the place I want to be. I love warm weather, and I also found, ironically, that the humidity of Florida, which a lot of people don't like, helps my sinuses out a lot. My allergies disappeared when I moved to Florida, so I thought this is the place I need to be. And then, last year rolls around, and then we get 9 inches of snow in Pensacola, and I'm like, what is going on here? We got a little dusting of snow this last week, and I thought, what a crazy thing to have snow happen, concurrent 2 years. And so but we enjoy it, and I enjoy being around, attempting to fish and all of that. So thinking about what we were discussing last time we met, we were talking about worldviews. We were talking about two main worldviews, biblical worldview and a humanistic or secular worldview. And those two worldviews are going to be in our discussion as we move in talking about creation versus evolution. And I also wanted to remind you that we need to have a consistent worldview. It's not I go to church, this is the way I act, and then I go to, go out in the world, and then I'm a different person. It needs to be consistent. I want to read for you a quote that I wasn't able to show you this morning, but it's from a guy named Brandon Manning, and it said, "The greatest single cause of atheism in this world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, walk out the door, and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable." The world is watching us, and they may say, we don't necessarily believe, but they're watching to see if we believe what we believe. And if we're inconsistent, then there's an aspect that they're going to say, yeah, see, I didn't think it was true. You didn't believe it. And so it's really important for us to have that consistent biblical worldview. Now, as we get into our topic for today, or for this evening, it's going to take on a little bit of a different flavor. We are going to be discussing the aspect of creation versus evolution. All right, this is going to be the main component, but we need to kind of define some of the terms and understand where some of these terms fall. So that is often the case when we think about the way that this argument is often depicted, or that we run into, is that it's faith versus like facts and science. That's kind of the way that it is generally displayed. Like, okay, you guys believe what you want to believe, and that's fairy tales, but we got the science and the facts on our side, and you really can't argue with that. Well, hopefully through the course of our conversation in this time and then into our next time, we're going to see that both of them are faith-based. They're both going to require a belief in something, and so they kind of fall into the realm of religion for both. So that's kind of the goal. But we do need to understand some aspects of this conversation. So when it comes to science, and I told you that I feel that science is by far the best subject. I enjoy it. I have a lot of unique stories when it comes to science. My first year teaching, I taught at Pensacola Christian Academy, which was a very structured, rigid place to teach at, and I had some unique situations that happened. One of them, I was really excited about mixing together some, well, if you know how zinc, well, let's say this, baking soda and vinegar react. You guys know how that works? That's like your typical, volcano explosion if you're going to do a science project or something. Well, zinc and hydrochloric acid are somewhat similar, but just on a larger scale, and you're producing gases that can catch on fire and things like that. Well, I found that it's even better if you do aluminum and hydrochloric acid. And so I mixed those things together for my class. I was teaching chemistry, and we were talking about reactions, and I mixed it together, and I set it on the table. There was like a special table in front of us, and it just sat there. And I was like, what is going on? Wow, this was a dud. How do I have dud aluminum? Like, it just blew my mind. Well, I found out there is a thing called a reaction time that has to happen. And so it's building up this energy, and so it starts to explode like a volcano. Steam is going to the ceiling. I grab it and move it quickly there was a little sink, and it's erupting all over the place. I had hydrochloric acid all over my hand that was like, turned my hand bright red. I thought, this is it. I'm going to lose my hand. But to me, as crazy as that was, I love science. You can't do that in your other subjects, right? You can't almost lose your hands in any other subject other than science. And so when we think about science, it's important for us to understand that there are a couple different types of science. So the first type of science that we're going to observe, and this one is operational science. Now, operational science is the science that we would use when we are observing things that are around us. You can see there that what we would have to do here is the scientific method, right? The scientific method was generated by a man named Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon was a scientist who said, if God is a God of orderliness, then we should be able to study His world in an orderly fashion. And so Sir Francis Bacon developed the scientific method. Now, maybe many of us in here have had to do a science project at some point in our lives. I know that my son just presented his science project this last week. My daughter's going to be presenting hers this next week, and they're going to be so excited about being done with those. When I was a science teacher, I didn't quite understand why parents were always upset with me when science project time came around, because I was like, well, the students should do this. Well, now I know. The students don't always do them, or the parents have to constantly stay on top of them. But when it comes to the scientific method is something that we would use to study operational science. If you notice up there, it says that there's a couple things that operational science needs to be. Operational science needs to be, first, observable. We need to be able to observe it. Now, when we observe something, we're typically going to be using our senses or some aspect of our senses. Okay, there's ways that we can observe things, and it's not a I saw it with my eyes, but I may have measured it with something. So that's observing. Another thing is that it needs to be repeatable. Okay? We need to be able to do the same thing. I have a pellet grill. I like to smoke meat. And one of the things, if you smoke meat, is if you can conquer the brisket, that is, you've arrived. Okay, if you can do that, doing a pork shoulder, those are easy. Doing chicken, that's easy. 4 hours, 225, you're good to go. Brisket, that's a different story. And that's kind of a pricey chunk of meat to throw on there and then mess it up, and then you don't really enjoy eating it. So I've made a couple of them. I think 3. And the first 2, I've just not been thrilled with it. I'm like, I don't see what's so special about brisket. As far as going through this, I've watched YouTube videos, and these guys, they do all this stuff, and then they hold it up, and it just looks amazing, and then mine didn't look that way. So I was disappointed. This last time, though, I cooked it, and I arrived. I made it. I got brisket that was really, really good. Here's the problem. I'm not exactly sure what I did. I will not be able to repeat it. I will go through the steps, and I will try to follow, I think, what I did, but I'm not exactly sure, and there's so many variables. And so when it comes to operational science, not only does it need to be observable, but it needs to be repeatable. And then the last thing, and this one's kind of unique, it needs to be falsifiable. All right, let me ask you, what do you think falsifiable means? Able to be proven wrong. That's right. So for something to be in the operational science realm, it needs to be able to be proven wrong. Meaning, if I say that this is the method that I arrived at this conclusion, if I change a component of it, I should arrive at a different conclusion. So if every time I smoked a brisket and it came out amazing, and I've done all sorts of different things, well then it's not really scientific. It may be just the matter of time. I always put it on at the same amount of time, and that's it. It doesn't matter what else I do to it. So those are some aspects when it comes to operational science. First, it needs to be observable. Second, it needs to be repeatable. And then the third thing is it needs to be able to be proven wrong. We need to change something and then make it not work. So that's the first type of science. The second type of science is historical science. Now, historical science is something that we can kind of start to put these two together because we're going to use operational science to give us information about historical science. But historical science is something that is used to explain past events. So this building, we can look at documents and details about this building. The problem is everything about this building is historical science. I don't know, did anybody that lived in the community observe this building being built? Okay, so any information about this building is that it's historical. Same thing with any other aspect. So when it comes to science, if there's something that we're trying to explain about the past, it falls into historical science, and because of that, we can't make direct observations about it. We just need to kind of make assumptions. How do I think that this occurred? How do I think that this world came about? And so because of that, our assumptions are going to be influenced by our worldview. And that is going to play a key component. And that's the reason why we talked about it first. Our worldview begins to inform give us these assumptions, and then things from there, we start to apply it to the objects that we have not been able to directly observe, and we just kind of assume, okay, I think this arrived at this, or I think that this occurred this way. Our worldview is going to give us that. So to kind of help us with this idea, I do this in my class, and it helps. I have some paper airplanes. All right. So can I get some volunteers to help me with throwing paper airplanes in church? Okay, all right. Come on down. All right. Okay, all right. I got 3 right there. All right, so I designed a couple of these. I actually had a student design one. Let's see. That one would be a student. I think it's the girl that told me she won a physics contest with it.
Oh, she did.
That's what. You're not going to criticize it then, okay? All right. So when we're ready, I'm going to start with you. Just give it a go. Throw it. Cover your eyes. Okay. We don't want anybody's eyes poked out. Like her eyes. Okay.
I should have suggested some.
Okay. He said should have suggested some improvements. All right. You ready? All right. Oh, all right. All right. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you. All right. So when it comes to what we were just observing there, while it was flying through the air, operational science. We could measure it. We could observe it. If we had cameras around that could, we could follow the pathway. We could even maybe figure out some of the airflow that went across the wings to try to figure it out. But now that they have landed, historical science from that point, especially if, let's say, we left and a different group of people came in and they started observing, and all they see is there's an airplane on the ground. How did it get there? Oh, well, we think probably people stood up here, but maybe it was pointed this way when it landed. Well, maybe they're back there because we assume it flew in that direction. We have to use assumptions at that point. And so that's the difference between operational science and historical science. And what we're going to find is everything about origins is historical. Every single thing. And because of that, we use assumptions, and those assumptions are from our worldview. And so let's continue talking about this aspect as we go through. Now, when we think about science, I've told you that I really, really enjoy science. And our society really begins to put a lot of weight into science. We think that maybe with enough time, we could probably solve almost any problem with science. And that's a dangerous thing because there are limits to science. Science has limitations to it. Now, from a biblical worldview, we would say, well, yeah, of course, we understand. We believe in God. God can't be measured by science, so there's a limitation to it. Well, that goes into our first thing. Science is limited to observables. So you think about what we could observe. We could observe the airplane flying through the air. We could observe different things that were that take place. We can measure the temperature. It's supposed to get really cold. All right, Pensacola, I think, for this next week is going to be below freezing for the lows every week or every day this next week. My parents in Iowa, when I called them coming down yesterday, they told me that it was going to be a high of 3, I think it was. That's why I don't live in Iowa. I do not enjoy that type of temperature. So that's something that we can observe, though. We can start measuring that. We can observe those things. So science is going to be limited to that. Here's the second thing. Science is going to be bound by the fact of it cannot prove anything. Because if science can prove something, that means it has now come to the conclusion and has established truth. And science can only, we could say, search for truth, but it cannot establish truth. So we can go about and we can test things and we can measure this and we can look at this, but we're not ever in science going to be able to get to the point of where we have now accomplished the goal and found all that we could. And so there's a term that I didn't put up on here, but science cannot make universal statements. So that kind of goes into the proof. Universal statements are things like all or none. So, could I scientifically say that all dogs have tails? No, I can't. To be able to do that, I would need to go and verify and look at every single dog and then verify all the dogs that ever existed and all of that. Science is limited. It cannot make these universal statements and it cannot prove. Let me give you an example of a violation of that idea. something that is still pretty fresh in most of our memories would be COVID. And when it came to COVID, do you remember the CDC and a man named Dr. Fauci started to tell us that scientists have proven that masks will slow the spread of COVID. So that is, first of all, a flaw. Science can't prove that. Science can't prove that. Now, they may say, we think that this would be a good method for us to do that, but when they went into that realm, they started to establish truth. Well, what came from that? Well, there came, now you go into stores, you can't enter unless you have a mask on because science has proven, and we now have this truth that has been established, and that's a dangerous thing. Science can't do that. And so I think one of the things I remember after COVID was the CDC coming out and making a statement that went along the lines of, the masks didn't do what we said that they did. And so that was something that afterwards they kind of said, we thought that was the case, and we said that that was the case. We have proven this, but we just kind of needed you guys to do something. And so we wanted to put masks on everyone. So science can't prove. All right, here's another thing. I want your help with this one. Science cannot make value judgments. Value judgments. Now, when we think about value judgments, I want you to think about the most valuable thing that you own that you would not sell, no matter how much money. The most valuable thing that you own that you would not sell, no matter how much money I could give you. Does anybody have an example of something like that? Your wife. All right, good answer. Good answer. Yes. All right, any other examples? Salvation. Anything else? Integrity. Now, sometimes, like when we think about an object, a lot of times in my classes, I'll get something like I had this week a student say, a girl said that she would not sell, and she had a bouquet of flowers that she must have dried out, and it was the first flowers that she was ever given, and it was given to her by her brother. And she said, I will never sell that. What made that so valuable? Meaning, source. There was a sentimental value. Science can't put a number on that. Think about paintings. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen paintings that are like millions of dollars, but when we look at it, we say, how on earth is it worth that much? Well, there is something about that painting that makes it worth a whole lot more than what science could tell. Science could go through and say, okay, here is the frame, and here's the paint, and here's the canvas. All of those things go for this amount, so we'll give you $10 for this painting, and it's worth millions of dollars because there's a component of it. Now, I want us to think about this, and it was brought up when this gentleman mentioned his wife. Think about, can science put a value on a person? I mean, science can calculate what a person is worth if it boils down all the atoms and calculates how much of each of those atoms are. But there's something that goes beyond when it comes to a person, that value is by far something that we would say has been given by someone else. It can't be just a matter of, well, you contribute to society, so we're going to say your value's a little bit more. You're really popular. Your value's higher. You make a lot of money, so therefore you're worth a lot of money. That's your value. Science can't make that. So science has a limitation on determining value. And then the last thing is that science and scientists are going to be affected by biases and presuppositions. Biases and presuppositions. Here's the thing, though. We all have biases and presuppositions. They come from our worldview. They inform our worldview. So there are certain things that I personally like versus things that I personally don't like, and they may not have any impact on anybody else, but it's just my bias and presupposition. A good example of this would be We could go around and ask what everybody's favorite food and least favorite food. You know what my least favorite food is? Spaghetti. Spaghetti is my least favorite food. And the reason is it's a messy food. It's a messy food. So up at Old Swanee, we would do a missions conference every year. And that missions conference, it would have a set of meals that would be prepared. Everybody would come to the meal and then go on. And my wife, she would sometimes be making things. And I'd say, hey, do you know what meal's being made tonight? And she's like, oh, it's spaghetti. And I was like, no, not spaghetti. Because personally, I have a bias and a presupposition against spaghetti. I don't like getting food all over my face and all over my clothes and that kind of stuff. Not a big fan of that. That's a bias and a presupposition. But when it comes to everything, we have biases and we have presuppositions. And as long as we understand that's a limit to science. So if a scientist is presenting something to us and we understand this person has a bias and a presupposition, well, then it is something that we just now know. He could be coming and giving us information that slants the feel a certain way versus another. All right, so those are some of the limits of science, things that we need to be careful of. And so, let me move this over really quickly. Get my phone out, make sure we're staying on track. All right, now, here's the next thing that we're going to discuss. So this topic is science and religion. And then worldview was something that we already had discussed. So religion, that's our next thing. So does science and religion just live on opposite ends of kind of a circle, and they're always away from each other, and they never really interact with each other? Is it true that, well, we come here and we worship God, and then we go out there and we do science? Well, going back to our consistent worldview, that was something that I felt was happening with our students. Our students would come to our school, they would learn about God, and they would learn about the Bible, and then they would go home, and then they would do other things, and the two worldviews never interacted with each other. And that to me was a concern. So when we think about religion, let's think about and this is a pretty quick definition of religion. So when it comes to religion, the definition is people's beliefs and opinions concerning the existence of nature, concerning the existence, nature, and worship of a deity or deities, and divine involvement in the universe and human life. Okay, so let me read it one more time. People's beliefs and opinions concerning the existence, nature, and worship of a deity or deities, and divine involvement in the universe and human life. Okay, so when it comes to religion, what does this encompass? Well, serving God. That's here we're here worshiping God. We have church. That's religion. Is atheism a religion? Based off our definition, what do you think? Yeah, the existence. So the beliefs and opinions concerning the existence of deities. So they would say that there is no God. How do they know? Well, they believe it, and they're going to believe it by faith. Faith is a requirement for religion. There's some other different types of worldviews that we could run across. One of them would be, think about serving God and worshiping God, and you have like theism. One that's close to it, but is not in any way equal, is deism. And that is where, God may have started things, but He's not involved whatsoever. And so that is a view that some would take. And so what is God's involvement in this world? And so all of those things are going to require faith. When you think about, for us as Christians, there's an important verse that we have, Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That is a verse that sums up faith. I believe that this is the way this is because, well, I believe it. The evidence for me supports that. I have faith in it. Other people, they have different faiths. They may say, oh, I believe that there is not a God, and they are going to have to believe that by faith. So if we understand that religion is something that has to be accepted by faith, something that is concerning God and His involvement, or if there is no God, and then there is definitely no involvement, then that is an important aspect for us to think about when it comes to religion. Now, the next components of what we're going to be discussing has to do with theories. So I'm going to put these up here. When it comes to theories, theories of science, theories of different aspects, we have operational theory. That's going to be using science, operational science, and that's going to be, and I know that's pretty small up there, that is going to be kind of a theory of how we would come about if I throw an airplane a certain way, or if I do a certain study a certain way, and I keep repeating that the same way, I should expect to get certain results. And because of operational theory, that's why we're able to build buildings, because we know that when we put structures in this arrangement, we are going to get a building that should be able to support this type of force, and that's operational theory. The other type of theory is going to be historical theory. Now, historical theory is an explanation of past events based on the interpretation of evidence that's available in the present. Both evolution and creation are going to fit into the historical theory part. So we see something that has occurred, or we see evidence of something, and as a result of that, we are now going to be thinking about what we know, and then we're going to try to apply that to say, okay, how did this arrive at this place? We find an airplane, and it is our job to figure out how that airplane landed the way it did. So I'm going to go through all of the possibilities and how I think that that airplane got there. So we have the difference between historical and operational theories. Now, the next aspect that we're going to look at here is we're building towards the concept of evolution and creation. So we have a theory, we have the types of science, and so now we're going to be dealing with a model. So if we take our worldview plus the science, we end up with a model that can be used. Maybe you spent some time putting together models. I put some models together. Sometimes that glue would get a little bit too sticky and then all of a sudden the door doesn't go on right or something like that, and your fingers are glued together and all of that. A model is a set of presuppositions, though, used to explain and predict scientific facts. A model is a set of presuppositions used to explain and predict scientific facts. So I'm going to take all of the things that I believe to be true, both historical and operational, and I'm going to put them together, and I'm going to now make this model to represent how I think this world got here, how all of the different components work together, and that is me making a model. And so that is a worldview plus science. I have to incorporate my worldview into that. And now we have a component that is going to deal with faith. And so the next thing here, we have kind of our two-model approach that we can now look at science and understand that. We have the creation model and the evolution model. Both of these models now are used to try to answer the question of how did we get here? How did this world come about? Obviously, we're looking at the end result. It's here. How did that happen? Do we have any information that gives us anything about the beginning? Should we just look at naturalistic processes to try to derive some means by which we got here? Or is there some other piece of information that is going to tell us how this came about? And that's your two differences. So when it comes to the creation model, well, you have the worldview that is going to be incorporated into that. I had mentioned in our last time that there are some ultimate presuppositions that are going to help us answer these questions. So with the creation model, how do we explain how this world came about? Well, we're going to be looking at the worldview. We're going to be looking at the science. We see the science. Well, here's our ultimate presupposition. For creation, the ultimate presupposition is the Bible is true. We had mentioned it earlier. That is very important. The Bible is true. I have to have a foundation to which I build all of my knowledge on. Now, there's been a lot of work in our world to undermine the authority of the Bible. And that's a problem because now when we have conversations with people, you think about if we have conversations today uh, with people in our community. Let's say we're witnessing to them. Well, it used to be, you go back 30, 40 years, you could say, hey, do you believe in Jesus? And they may say, oh, yeah, I do, or no, I don't really know if I don't think I believe that he's God. You know, there is an understanding that was there. Today, that conversation has changed because now you may say, hey, do you believe in Jesus? And they'll say, I don't know who you're talking about. And so you have to now start at a further back and you have to explain, okay, who this Jesus was and why he came for us. And when it comes to our conversations with people, now if there is a questioning of, I don't even think that the Bible is true, now that's really hard to have a solid conversation with somebody because now your foundational thing, they're not even sure if they believe in. But from a creation worldview, the Bible is true. Notice what the ultimate presupposition is for an evolutionary worldview. The ultimate presupposition is there is no supernatural. Now, a lot of times in my classes, I do run into some students that are saying, well, I know somebody that is a Christian that believes in evolution. And it's interesting. Before I have somebody that will tell me that, I will ask them, do you think it's possible for someone to be a Christian and to believe in evolution? And I get pretty much a mixed reaction. I'll get people that'll be like, no, that's not possible. And then I'll get others that'll say, yes, it is possible. Well, I tell them, yeah, it is possible that somebody believes in evolution, but is saved and is a Christian. Problem is, their worldviews are very inconsistent with each other. Their belief about how this world came about says that the Bible is not true. But they're saying, well, I believe that the Bible is true. And so we have a conflict that starts to happen in there. Now, a question that we end up spending quite a bit of time in our class about is the topic of, can we compromise? Can we somehow meet in the middle? Because back when we're going to talk about radiometric dating. We're going to talk about some of that in our next conversation. But when that started coming on the scenes and you had questioning of dates and like, okay, I think that maybe the world is older than what we had thought of, you start to get the church said, hey, well, we can still believe in God and we can accept this level of science. And so maybe a compromise can be viewed and reached. Well, here's the thing. We need to make sure, though, that when we talk about these, we have to be consistent with our worldview. And so I'm going to give you the top 3 compromise views. And maybe you've heard of these. So the first one is the gap view. So the gap theory is a theory that was promoted by Thomas Chalmers, and it was promoted in the C.I. Scofield Bible, in that between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, that there was a gap of time, millions of years, billions of years perhaps. And God created the world, and then between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, he ruined it. He destroyed it. And then he recreated it in Genesis 1:2. So, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Genesis 1:1, Genesis 1:2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And so, Thomas Chalmers said, you know what? I think something happened in between those two. Maybe that's when Lucifer fell and God went at him, and you had a whole world of people that lived on this earth. Satan came, God destroyed it, and he did so in such a way that it was without form and void. And so he must have done that with water, because it does talk about water was on the face of the deep. And so they call it the flood, or any remnants of the flood, Lucifer's flood. It's not a flood that happened during Noah's time. It was Lucifer's flood. And so that's where they say, hey, we got the timeline. We got millions of years, billions of years, and now we have still God involved in this. That's the gap theory. Well, here's a problem with the gap theory. You have a whole world of people that died. The Bible's really clear about when death happens. Death came about as because of Adam's sin. And these people died before Adam was around. They would say that the timeline was exactly the timeline, and that Adam and Eve were created on the sixth day, and they would say, yep, that's the way it is. Well, you have a whole bunch of people that died before that. They said a whole world, and that's where they get some of their fossils from and all of that. So that's one view. The second view is called progressive creationism. Now this one's a little different. They say that God created in stages, and these stages were millions of years apart. And that evolutionary progression took place in between that, and God would come in, and those days of creation were more like creative acts of time, and you have millions of years that separate each one of those. And so that was a compromise. Well, for evolution to be true, you have to have death and suffering, and that's the way that evolutionary progression occurs. So once again, we have death before Adam, and so that's a challenge. Probably the most popular one, though, is that bottom one, theistic evolution. And maybe that's something that you have heard before. Theistic evolution is most popular. There is a website. It is called BioLogos. And Francis Collins was a pretty notable guy that started that organization. And what it believes is that God was at the beginning, initiated the Big Bang, and has let evolution take over. And that God is still involved in things, but is kind of just overseeing. All of these views would say that a man can be saved. They'd be saved through faith, through Jesus. He was the second Adam. They believe in the first Adam, and so Jesus was the second Adam. Because of Adam's sin, we all die, and Jesus Christ is how we are made alive. They would say that is completely possible, but we have a problem because their view of creation contradicts what the Bible says. And now we're saying, okay, they would say, you know what, the Bible's not true. That's a very dangerous thing for us to say, because as Christians, where is our eternal security found? Like, where, if I was going to go look for it, where would I find that eternal security? I would find the information in the Bible. Well, if the Bible was not true in Genesis, where else is it not true? And that's the slippery slope that all of these theories begin to go down, and they're questioning, well, maybe God didn't really mean that these days were 24-hour days. Maybe God didn't really mean that He created them in this successive acts, but maybe they were just long periods of time. And as Christians, we would say, if I'm going to say some part of the Bible's not true, then none of the Bible's true. And that's an important thing. So can we compromise? And the answer is no. Biblical worldview, evolutionary worldview. It's one or the other. You either believe the Bible is true or you don't believe the Bible is true. Okay? All right, so that brings us to the end of our first lecture here. And so I think we're right at our 45-minute time mark. And so I guess we'll take a little bit of a break, and then we'll get back at it.